the moment my daughter-in-law, Vanessa, turned to me at my son's wedding and said, "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with." I felt my chest tighten. Her words were sharp, icy, and public. I froze, standing stiffly in the grand hall as all eyes turned toward me. My face burned. I tried to smile, but it was weak, forced. Around us, laughter erupted, fake, cruel, the kind that leaves you small in your own skin. My heart sank, and I felt tears rising, though I refused to let them fall. Her parents, decked in designer suits and glittering jewelry, leaned back in their chairs, smiling with superiority, clearly enjoying the show. And then, just as I thought I couldn't take another second of humiliation, her father gasped. His eyes widened so sharply it made me pause. "Aren't you that secret billionaire who bought my company?" he said, his voice trembling with shock. The laughter stopped. The room went quiet, but not quiet like relief. It was quiet like everyone had just seen a storm on the horizon and didn't know which way to run. I caught my son's gaze, a mixture of confusion and fear crossing his face. He had no idea what was coming next. And I smiled. Not the fake, polite smile I'd been wearing, but a small, quiet smile of satisfaction, of secrets finally ready to walk out into the sunlight. But that moment, the gasping, the staring, the shifting of eyes in disbelief, was only the beginning. What Vanessa and her parents didn't know yet was that I had been planning, waiting, and quietly building a life they could never imagine. And tonight, that life was about to step forward in ways they would never forget. It didn't start this way. My name is Margaret Hayes, and for years I lived a life that to the outside world looked ordinary. My house was modest, my car reliable, and my wardrobe practical. I was the mother of a kind, ambitious young man named Daniel. We weren't rich. We weren't poor. We just existed quietly in the rhythm of our simple, ordinary lives. I took pride in small victories, Daniel's school awards, his first job, the moments when he smiled without worry. But I had a secret life, one no one knew about, not even Daniel. For nearly 2 decades, I had been quietly investing. I didn't flaunt it. I didn't tell anyone. It was my own little rebellion against the world that had once laughed at me when I started as a struggling single mother. I learned the hard way how cruel people could be, how they would sneer at your old coat, whisper about your unsuccessful life, and judge you based on the size of your paycheck instead of the size of your heart. I swore I would never let them hurt me again. So I built a fortune in silence, quietly acquiring stakes in small companies until one day, by smart moves and patience, I owned something no one in my past would have believed. I owned a fortune that could rival the people who had once whispered about me, mocked me, and looked down on me. But I had no need to show off, not yet. I was content to watch from the shadows, knowing that my life had value that no one could take away. And then came Vanessa. Daniel met her in college. She was beautiful, charismatic, and polished, the kind of woman whose presence demanded attention. She was also from a wealthy family, which I didn't mind at first. I wanted my son to be happy, but as the years passed, her charm began to show its sharp edges. I began to notice the little comments, the smirks when she spoke about my humble background. I remember the first time she subtly suggested that Daniel's home was quaint and charming in a rustic way. My blood had boiled, but I kept calm. I smiled, I nodded, and I said nothing. Still, I hoped love would soften her. I hoped that maybe with time, she would see me as a mother, not a target for ridicule. But time did not heal her cruelty. It sharpened it. By the time she proposed to Daniel, I had begun to suspect she cared more about our social standing than our happiness. My instincts, honed by years of hardship and survival, screamed at me that something was off. But Daniel, head over heels in love, dismissed my warnings. So the wedding arrived. The grand hall glittered with chandeliers, golden tables, and flowers that smelled sweet enough to make your head spin. Guests mingled in designer suits and gowns, their laughter ringing like crystal. I took my place, careful to stay in the background, quietly proud of Daniel and nervous about what was about to unfold. Then, Vanessa decided to introduce me to her family. I should have known. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, predatory. She gestured toward me, her tone loud enough for the nearest dozen guests to hear. "Mom, this is the family embarrassment we're stuck with." I froze. The word stabbed. The guests laughed. Daniel's face turned red with embarrassment, his hand gripping mine under the table. I felt the heat of shame, the familiar burn of humiliation I had faced too many times before. But instead of crumbling, I held my head high. I let the silence settle, let the laughter hang in the air for just a moment longer. And then the moment that shifted everything happened. Vanessa's father, who had been chuckling along with everyone else, paused mid-laugh. His eyes widened as if lightning had struck him. "Aren't you that secret billionaire who bought my company?" he asked. I saw gasps ripple through the room. People shifted in their seats, murmuring. I felt the power in the room shift. Suddenly, the tables were turned. The family that had looked down on me now looked up in shock, uncertainty, and perhaps even fear. I wanted to speak. I wanted to explain. But I stayed quiet. I wanted them to feel the weight of realization without interruption. Daniel looked at me, confusion and awe in his eyes. He didn't know the half of it. He didn't know that for years I had been planning this silent revenge, not out of spite, but out of a need for justice, a need to show that kindness and patience could outlast cruelty, that a life built on empathy, hard work, and smart choices could one day overshadow arrogance and entitlement. The whispers started to grow. Vanessa's mother clutched her pearls, her mouth forming a silent, "Oh no." The laughter that had once mocked me turned into murmurs of disbelief. And yet, in the midst of all this, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time, satisfaction. But the night was far from over. Vanessa did not yet know the full story. Her father had only recognized me because of a single business deal. They did not yet know the lengths I had gone to, the companies I had acquired, the fortunes I controlled. They did not know that I had, in effect, held the power to change their lives forever. And as I looked around the hall, I realized something else. Daniel's happiness was still at risk. Vanessa's arrogance could still hurt him, and I would not allow that. Not tonight. Not ever. I took a deep breath, and as I prepared to reveal just enough of my secret to shift the balance, I noticed Vanessa's eyes narrow. She was no longer smiling. Her charm had cracked, revealing a glimpse of the fear beneath. And that, I knew, was only the beginning, because what she did next would change everything. Long before the wedding hall lights shimmered and Vanessa's cruel words echoed through the room, my life was a very different story. I wasn't always a secret billionaire. In fact, for many years, I was invisible to the world, struggling to make ends meet while raising my son alone. I remember those mornings vividly. The alarm would buzz at 5, and I'd pull myself out of bed with aching muscles and a heart full of worry. Daniel was just a boy, bright-eyed, and full of questions that I sometimes didn't have the answers for. "Mom, why don't we have new clothes like the kids at school?" he'd ask, and I would force a smile, tucking the ache in my chest behind words of reassurance. "We have what we need, Daniel. That's what matters." It wasn't always easy to convince him. The world has a way of measuring people by what they own, by the labels stitched into their shirts, the cars in their driveways, the houses they live in. And back then, we had none of that. We had love, yes, but love doesn't pay bills, doesn't buy medicine when a child is sick, doesn't stop the whispers of neighbors who think they are better than you. I took every job I could find, cleaning houses, waiting tables, typing reports late into the night. I barely slept. My hands were always tired. My back ached, but I refused to let Daniel feel my despair. I wanted him to know that life could be hard, yes, but also that he could rise above it. Then one day, while working as an assistant in a small office, I noticed something that would change everything. The company I worked for was struggling, nearly bankrupt, but had a potential for growth if managed correctly. Most of my coworkers had long since given up, seeing failure as the end. I, however, saw opportunity. I started reading books, journals, financial statements, news articles, anything I could get my hands on. I spent nights learning about investments, about companies, about how money worked when you let it work for you instead of against you. I started small, investing the little savings I had, always cautious, always quiet. No one noticed. I didn't need anyone to notice. I didn't need validation. I only needed results. Over the years, I learned patience. I learned how to recognize patterns in markets, how to find companies with hidden potential, how to buy when others sold out of fear, how to hold when others panicked. Slowly, quietly, my investments grew. Then one deal led to another. One small stake turned into a larger one. And before long, I had the power to acquire entire companies. Not for the thrill of power, not for show, but to create security for myself and Daniel, and to prove to the world that a woman like me could rise without asking anyone for help. And yet, despite the fortune I was quietly building, I remained the same person inside. I didn't flaunt my wealth. I didn't change my demeanor. I wanted to teach Daniel humility, compassion, and resilience. I wanted him to understand that money doesn't define you. It's your choices, your heart, your courage that do. Meanwhile, Vanessa entered Daniel's life. At first, I thought she was harmless. She was elegant, smart, and outgoing, everything my son admired. But there was something in her eyes, a flicker of judgment, a need to be above others, that unsettled me. I could see it in the small ways she spoke, the subtle comments she made. And I knew, even then, that if she ever married Daniel, I would have to protect him, not from the world, but from the woman he loved blindly. Years passed, and I continued my quiet empire building. I acquired stakes in tech startups, manufacturing businesses, and even a small airline. People knew me as a private investor. Some called me lucky. Others called me shrewd. Few guessed the full scope of my wealth. And that was fine. I wanted them to guess. I wanted to watch the day when they would finally understand that the woman they dismissed, laughed at, or ignored had been shaping her destiny while they played their petty games. I didn't plan for revenge out of spite, at least not initially. I planned for it as a shield. I knew Vanessa's family would judge me. I knew they would see me as beneath them, but I also knew that when the time came, when Daniel's happiness was at stake, I could reveal the truth, and that truth would be a revelation they would never forget. And then came the moment when everything began to converge. Daniel proposed to Vanessa, and the wedding was set. Invitations went out. Flowers were ordered. Tables were decorated. And I felt a strange mix of excitement and dread. My son was happy, yes, but Vanessa's presence had a weight I could feel. The way she spoke to me, the way she smiled at her parents, the tiny, imperceptible sneers when she mentioned my background, all of it screamed trouble. The day before the wedding, I went over the final arrangements with the event planner. Everything sparkled, everything was perfect. But even as I walked through the grand hall, envisioning my son's joy, my mind kept returning to Vanessa. I remembered every insult, every moment of quiet judgment, every little slight she had thrown at me. And I reminded myself, patience, silence, timing. That night, I sat alone in my room, thinking about how far I had come. I thought about the small apartments, the long nights, the tears shed silently. I thought about Daniel, and I promised myself that nothing, not cruelty, not arrogance, not wealth, would ever take his happiness from him. And I knew that if Vanessa tried to humiliate me, to assert dominance, she would be the one to face a revelation she never saw coming. And then it happened, the first small tremor of what would become the wedding day storm. While reviewing the guest list, I noticed something odd. Vanessa's father had mentioned casually that he no longer owned his company. It had been sold quietly a few years ago, a business venture gone wrong. Most people didn't know who had bought it, but I did. I smiled quietly to myself. I had been the one to acquire it, working behind the scenes, ensuring that it would be handled carefully, and that I would remain unnoticed. And now, at the wedding, Vanessa's father would see me in person. He would recognize me. He would realize that the humble mother standing beside her son was, in fact, the one who had saved his company, the one who had quietly bought his empire without anyone knowing. I didn't yet reveal it. I let it simmer. I let the moment grow in my mind, imagining the shock, the disbelief, the subtle panic that would ripple through the room. By the time Vanessa introduced me as the family embarrassment, I knew the time was near. I knew that her smug, mocking laughter would soon collide with the truth she never expected. And when her father gasped in shock, his words confirmed what I had hoped. The game had begun. But even then, the full extent of what I would reveal, the chain reaction that would shake her family to its core, had not yet started. The real storm, the revenge born from years of patience and silent triumph, was still waiting in the wings. And as I looked around the hall, feeling the power of the moment, I realized one thing clearly. This was only the beginning. The day of the wedding arrived, and everything sparkled as if it had been lifted from a magazine. White roses lined the aisle. Crystal chandeliers reflected light across the polished floor. Guests in designer dresses and sharp suits mingled, their laughter ringing high in the grand hall. But despite the glamour, my heart was steady. I had learned long ago that appearances could deceive, and that control often came from calm patience, not from rushing forward. I watched Daniel as he greeted guests, his face full of joy, unaware of the storm quietly waiting to unfold. He was so happy, so trusting, and that trust was something I had always wanted to protect. I smoothed my modest navy dress, adjusted my pearls, and reminded myself to stay poised. Vanessa, on the other hand, moved through the crowd like a queen, smiling, laughing, and surveying everything with a sharp, calculating gaze. She had no idea how fragile her confidence really was. When the time came for her to introduce me to her parents, I sensed it. Vanessa was looking for the perfect moment to humiliate me in front of everyone. I felt her smirk before she spoke. "This is the family embarrassment we're stuck with," she said, her voice dripping with mockery, loud enough for everyone near the table to hear. The words stung. The laughter around us hit like a wave. I felt my stomach tighten, my pulse quicken, but I did not move. I did not falter. I let her have her moment, let the room fill with her false triumph. Vanessa's father chuckled. Vanessa's mother giggled behind a hand. Some of the guests whispered, eyes darting between us. Daniel froze, his jaw tight, trying to decide if he should intervene. I saw the hurt in his eyes. He didn't understand yet, but he would. And then it happened. Vanessa's father gasped so loudly it drew everyone's attention. His chair scraped the floor as he leaned back, eyes wide. "Aren't you that secret billionaire who bought my company?" For a brief moment, the room went silent. Then whispers started, soft at first, growing louder. I stayed still, letting them settle into the room like a heavy weight. Vanessa's confident smile faltered. Her mother's hand flew to her chest. Guests leaned in, murmuring to each other, some snapping pictures with their phones. Vanessa looked at me, her mouth opening and closing as if she wanted to scream, but no sound came out. She had never expected this. Her family had never expected this. And for the first time, the air shifted. The balance had changed. But even as the shock settled in, I knew this wasn't the end. The first wave of surprise had hit, but the real revelation, the part that would truly turn the tables, had not yet arrived. That came in the next moment, when Vanessa's father, still staring at me, began to connect the dots. You're Margaret Hayes, he said slowly, as if tasting the words. The woman who bought our company after the merger, the one who saved us from bankruptcy? I nodded slightly, a small, calm smile on my face. Yes, that was me. The woman they thought they could dismiss, laugh at, or ignore was the very person who held the power they had once feared losing. Vanessa's mother gasped. But we never knew. Why? Her voice trembled. She was shocked, yes, but also angry. The realization that they had been dealing with someone they underestimated filled the room with tension. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet but firm. I don't flaunt my life. I said, I work in silence, I help where I can, and I protect the people I love. But I will not allow cruelty or arrogance to hurt them. Guests looked around, murmuring. Some nodded in admiration. Others simply stared, stunned. And Vanessa? Her eyes were full of disbelief, confusion, and a flicker of fear. She had expected to humiliate me. Instead, she was facing a storm she had never imagined. But the moment that followed shocked me even more than her reaction. Daniel's smile faded, replaced by a look of dawning understanding and fear. He turned toward me, his voice barely above a whisper. Mom, is this why you've been so? I don't understand. Yes, Daniel, I said, my hand brushing his briefly. I've always had a plan. Not for revenge, but to protect you. To ensure no one ever mocks or underestimates you, or me again. The whispers grew. Phones were raised. The air was thick with tension. Vanessa's father stood, stepping forward, his face pale but incredulous. I can't believe it. All this time. I didn't even know. And that's when it happened, the first real explosion of chaos in the wedding hall. Vanessa, desperate to regain control, raised her voice. This is impossible, she shouted. You can't just. Her words were cut off by a sudden, sharp sound. Glass shattered. People gasped. A large vase at the center of her family's table toppled to the ground, water and flowers spilling everywhere. The hall erupted into murmurs and exclamations. Vanessa froze, her eyes wide with panic. Her parents clutched each other, unsure whether to yell or faint. And in that instant, I realized something crucial. The storm had only just begun. The first wave of shock had hit, but what followed next would change everything for Vanessa, her family, and the wedding itself. Because the revelation of who I really was had triggered something unexpected, something dangerous, something that would escalate far beyond mere words. And as I took a slow breath, I noticed Vanessa's eyes dart toward the exit. She was already thinking about escape, about regaining power, about undoing what she could not yet comprehend. But I knew I had the upper hand. The chaos had started, and the night was far from over. The hall was in chaos. Water from the shattered vase spilled across the polished floor, petals and glass scattered everywhere, and the guests recoiled in shock. Vanessa's parents clutched each other, their faces pale. Some guests whispered nervously. Others gawked, their phones raised to capture the moment. And in the middle of it all, Vanessa froze, her perfect facade crumbling like brittle porcelain. For a moment, I simply watched. The room had finally shifted. The power balance had moved from her and her family to me, but I didn't move forward just yet. I let the moment linger, let the fear settle, let them realize that their arrogance had consequences. Daniel grabbed my hand, his grip tight. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, voice trembling. He had never seen this side of me before, and while he was proud, he was also scared. I squeezed his hand reassuringly. "Just watch," I said. "Let them see the truth." Vanessa's eyes flitted around the room, searching for allies, searching for someone to validate her status. But no one came to her rescue. Her father's earlier shock had frozen him. Her mother was biting her lip, trying not to faint. And the guests? Some looked impressed, others confused. No one laughed anymore. The mockery had vanished, replaced by stunned attention. Vanessa finally found her voice, her tone sharp and trembling. "Margaret, she stammered, trying to formulate a coherent attack, but the words failed her. The arrogance she had relied on for years was gone, replaced by panic. I stepped forward calmly, letting the room feel my presence. "Vanessa," I said softly, almost gently, "you've spent years judging people for what they have, not for who they are. Tonight, you are learning a lesson in humility. Not for me, but for Daniel, for everyone who matters." Her gasp was audible. She opened her mouth to respond, then closed it again. Her family shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other as if trying to find a way out of the nightmare I had revealed. For a moment, it seemed the chaos might settle. The air was tense, but nothing violent happened. The flowers lay scattered on the floor. The vase was in shards, and Vanessa's pride was in pieces. I let that tension fill the hall, letting them taste the humiliation they had always reserved for others. But just as I thought the moment had reached its peak, a new wave of shock hit. Vanessa's father, still pale but trying to regain composure, cleared his throat. "Margaret, you own more than just our old company, don't you?" His voice was shaky, but curiosity edged his fear. I smiled slightly, keeping my calm. "Yes, what you see today is only a fraction of what I've built. I've done it quietly, without arrogance, without show, but I will not tolerate disrespect or cruelty, especially toward those I love." Vanessa's jaw tightened. Her parents' eyes widened further. Guests murmured, and the whispers grew louder. The room was electric with tension, a mixture of shock, admiration, and disbelief. Then it happened, something I had not expected, something that sent my heart racing. A waiter, trying to navigate the chaos, slipped on the wet floor, sending a tray of champagne glasses flying into the air. The crystal shattered loudly, scattering across the dance floor. Guests screamed, stepping back. One of the glasses hit a chandelier, causing it to sway dangerously. The sound echoed through the hall. The polished marble floor became slippery with spilled champagne. Panic rippled through the crowd. Vanessa screamed, her voice high-pitched and panicked, pointing at the mess. This is your fault," she yelled. "You ruined everything." I stood perfectly still, observing. No, I hadn't caused the accident, but the timing couldn't have been better. Her claim of blame only highlighted her desperation, her need to regain control in a room where she had already lost power. Daniel grabbed my hand again. "Mom, what do we do?" he asked, worried about the escalating panic. "Stay calm," I said. "Let them realize that chaos isn't the end. It's a lesson." Vanessa's mother suddenly shouted, pointing toward the exit. "Security! Someone call security!" Guests turned their heads, some whispering that the wedding was ruined. Vanessa's father muttered under his breath, his confidence shattered. The family had been toppled from their pedestal, and there was no way back yet. And just as I thought the moment couldn't escalate further, the unexpected happened. One of the chandelier crystals slipped completely loose and tumbled toward the floor. For a brief, terrifying second, it seemed it might hit someone. People gasped, scrambling for safety. A scream pierced the hall. I froze for a heartbeat, heart pounding, watching the scene unfold. Vanessa's eyes widened in absolute terror. Her hands covered her mouth. Her family huddled together. Daniel looked at me, confused and scared. And in that moment, I realized the storm had only just begun. Because this wasn't about wealth or pride or social standing. This was about power, patience, and timing. And tonight, the truth of who I really was and the consequences of arrogance was going to shake everyone to their core. The chandelier crystal fell, narrowly missing the guest nearest to it. The hall erupted into screams. Guests scattered. Vanessa cried out, horrified. Her father grabbed her arm, shaking his head in disbelief. The chaos was real, immediate, and terrifying. And I stood there, calm, composed, aware that the revelation had sparked more than shock. It had unleashed fear, uncertainty, and a first taste of accountability. The room had been turned upside down, and there was no going back. This, I realized, was only the beginning of the storm. The hall had descended into chaos, and for a moment, it felt like the wedding might completely unravel. Guests were whispering, some were taking videos, and others were trying to help the staff clean up the mess. The spilled champagne, the shattered vase, the dangling chandelier, everything screamed disaster. And in the middle of it all, Vanessa stood frozen, her perfect composure gone. I took a deep breath, letting the noise wash over me. Chaos has a way of revealing true character, and tonight, everyone was about to see more than they ever expected. I moved deliberately toward Vanessa, my posture calm, my gaze steady. This was no longer just about her insult, her arrogance, or her family's judgment. This was about control, about showing that patience, planning, and resilience could outweigh cruelty and entitlement. Vanessa's eyes followed me, panic and defiance warring across her face. She tried to raise her voice, but it faltered. You think you can just... I raised a hand gently, cutting her off. No, I said softly. I don't need to think. I simply act when the time is right. And tonight, the time is here. Her parents, still reeling from the earlier revelation, whispered to each other. I could hear the fear in their voices. Their laughter, which had once been so smug, had completely vanished. The air was thick with tension, and I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. Daniel stepped closer to me. Mom, what are you going to do? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. I placed a hand on his shoulder. Watch and learn, I said. Sometimes people need to see consequences for themselves before they understand kindness and empathy. I started subtly shifting the guests' attention, speaking quietly but deliberately. I reminded them of stories they had heard about successful women in business, about patience and intelligence, about people who built empires silently. The murmurs grew, and I could see the perspective in the room changing. Some guests leaned forward, curious. Others looked at Vanessa and her family, beginning to understand the contrast between humility and arrogance. Vanessa tried to regain control. She straightened her shoulders, raising her chin like a queen in command. This is ridiculous, she shouted, though the tremor in her voice betrayed her fear. You can't just take over everything. I stayed calm, measured. I didn't take over anything unfairly. I said, I worked, I learned, I invested wisely. And unlike some people, I didn't rely on inherited wealth or connections to get ahead. I built my life from the ground up, quietly, with patience and effort. Her father's face went pale. He knew I was telling the truth that had been hidden from them for years, the truth that Vanessa had mocked, laughed at, and dismissed. And now, that truth was unraveling in front of everyone. Then, without warning, the wedding hall lights flickered. A soft hum rose from the ceiling as the electricity dimmed briefly. Guests gasped, and Vanessa's mother clutched her pearls, visibly shaken. I smiled slightly. The small disruption only added tension, highlighting the unpredictability of the evening and the fragility of control. Vanessa's panic grew. She glanced at her parents, pleading silently, searching for someone to defend her. But there was no defense. Their shock had left them helpless. They had underestimated me, and now they were learning what it meant to misjudge someone who had quietly built everything she needed. Then came another sound, a crash from the back of the hall. A chair tipped over, sending silverware and a plate clattering to the ground. Guests jumped, some screamed, and whispers escalated into a nervous buzz. The chaos, though small, was enough to amplify the tension, keeping the atmosphere electric. Vanessa's face turned red, a mix of anger and fear. This is your fault. You've ruined everything, she screamed. I remained composed. No, Vanessa, I haven't ruined anything. You've shown your true self tonight. The arrogance, the cruelty, the judgment. That is what you've revealed. And the rest of the world is just starting to see it. Her parents whispered frantically. We didn't know. Her father stammered. We never imagined. And then the final escalation of the evening began. As I spoke calmly, a waiter, still navigating the wet floor, slipped again. This time, a tray of desserts went flying into the air, landing with a crash on the corner table. Guests jumped back. A few shrieked. Vanessa's face turned white. Her mother gasped, clutching her hand to her mouth. Daniel grabbed my arm. Mom, are they going to be okay? He asked, his eyes wide. I nodded, keeping calm. Yes, but let them feel the lesson. Sometimes shock and discomfort teach more than words ever could. And that's when it happened. The unexpected twist that no one in the hall anticipated. A photographer, trying to capture the drama unfolding, accidentally knocked over a decorative stand. A small fountain of water tipped, splashing across the floor near the guests. People shrieked again, stepping back in panic. Vanessa's scream echoed through the hall, sharp and terrified. I realized in that instant that this night had spiraled beyond simple revelation or humiliation. The combination of chaos, fear, and shock had created a storm that would linger in everyone's memory forever. Vanessa and her family had no idea how deep this storm could go, and I was only just beginning to show them. I stood tall, calm, collected, knowing that patience and timing were my greatest allies. And as I glanced at Vanessa, trembling and desperate, I knew one thing clearly: the night was far from over. Because the next move, the move that would truly change everything, was already in motion. The room was still buzzing with chaos. Guests whispered nervously, stepping around shards of glass and puddles of champagne and water. Vanessa's family huddled together, their earlier confidence completely shattered. Her mother's fingers trembled as she clutched her pearls. Her father's face was pale, and Vanessa herself was trembling, her perfectly polished image in tatters. I moved deliberately through the room, calm, poised, every step measured. My son, Daniel, followed quietly, his eyes wide with a mixture of awe and concern. He had never seen me like this, never seen the quiet power I had cultivated for so long finally stepping into the light. I knew the guests were watching. Every whisper, every glance, every slight movement would amplify the lesson that Vanessa and her family were about to learn. And I would let it play out exactly as it needed to. I approached Vanessa, who froze in place, her chest rising and falling quickly. Margaret, please, she stammered, voice shaky. This is our wedding day. You can't ruin everything. I smiled gently, almost kindly. I'm not ruining anything, Vanessa. I'm revealing the truth. Tonight, the world sees what arrogance and cruelty can lead to. And I promise Daniel will be protected. Her panic was growing. Her hands shook. She looked to her parents, pleading silently. But her father was frozen, still absorbing the revelation that I had been the one who quietly acquired his company and restored its fortune. Her mother's face was pale, lips pressed tightly together. No one could stop what was happening. Then I decided to escalate the next phase of control. I moved toward the microphone stand at the front of the hall. Guests turned their attention, curious. I picked up the mic, my voice calm and clear. Ladies and gentlemen, I began, I want to thank you all for coming today. I also want to share something important, something that explains why tonight has unfolded the way it has. Whispers filled the hall. Vanessa's eyes widened, panic rising. Her father's hand tightened on hers, while her mother's lips parted in disbelief. I am Margaret Hayes, I said, letting the name settle in the room. Some of you may know me from business. Some may not. What you don't know is that I have spent many years quietly building a life that allows me to protect and support those I love. I have invested, I have learned, and I have worked tirelessly. I did not flaunt my wealth because it was never about showing off. It was about security, justice, and resilience. The room went silent. Every guest was listening, hanging on my words. Vanessa's jaw tightened, her face a mask of fury and fear. She had expected humiliation, yes, but not this level of revelation. Her parents had expected nothing, only a quiet, obedient mother-in-law. Now, they were faced with a storm they hadn't seen coming. I looked directly at her father. You may not have realized it, but I was the one who purchased your company, who restored it, and who ensured that it remained successful. I did it quietly, without recognition, without fame. And tonight, it seems the universe has given us a lesson. Arrogance and cruelty will always meet consequences. Vanessa's mother gasped, clutching her chest. The guests murmured, some nodding in quiet approval. Vanessa's face twisted in disbelief. She opened her mouth to speak, but I raised a hand gently, signaling calm authority. And then the next wave of chaos struck. A waiter, still navigating the slippery floor, tripped near the dessert table again. This time, a large platter of chocolate-covered strawberries flew through the air, landing with a mess across the dance floor. Guests jumped back, some shouting, some laughing nervously. Vanessa's scream echoed through the room, a high-pitched mix of fear and frustration. I remained composed. The chaos, though unplanned, only amplified the lesson I was teaching. Vanessa had lost control completely. Her parents were paralyzed by shock. And Daniel was beginning to understand the extent of my power, not just financially, but emotionally and strategically. Vanessa's father finally spoke, his voice shaky. Margaret, I didn't know you. How? I didn't need your recognition. I said softly, calm, and unwavering. I built my life for the people I care about, for justice and for integrity. And tonight, I am simply showing that patience, kindness, and intelligence can overcome arrogance and cruelty. Vanessa's panic reached a peak. She tried to storm forward, to regain control, but the room's attention was no longer on her. Guests were watching me, listening to me, understanding the depth of what had been revealed. Her family had been toppled from their pedestal, and there was no way back. Then, the final escalation of the night began, a sound that made every heart in the room stop. A chandelier, weakened by earlier vibrations, started to sway dangerously above the main table. Guests gasped. Some shouted. Vanessa froze, her face paling. Her parents grabbed each other, eyes wide with fear. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I simply watched, calm, knowing that sometimes the most dramatic moments happen naturally when arrogance and chaos collide. And just as everyone held their breath, the chandelier wobbled violently, sending a tiny crystal tumbling down. It bounced harmlessly off the edge of the table, but the sound echoed through the hall like a warning. Vanessa screamed, stepping back. Her mother fainted slightly, supported by a nearby guest. Her father's hands trembled. Daniel turned to me, eyes wide. "Mom, this is dangerous." "Yes," I said, voice steady. "But sometimes danger teaches lessons no words ever can. And tonight, the lesson is clear. Underestimate no one. Judge no one. Because the world has a way of balancing itself." Vanessa tried to speak again, her voice cracking. This isn't over." I smiled quietly. "No, Vanessa, it's just beginning." The hall had descended into total mayhem. Guests were stepping back nervously, some clutching their phones, others covering their mouths in fear. The chandelier swung perilously, casting reflections across the walls and ceiling, creating flashes of light that seemed almost sinister. Vanessa was frozen, her face white as she stared at the dangling fixture. Her parents clutched each other, helpless, unsure whether to scream or collapse in shock. I remained calm, composed, every movement deliberate. I knew fear had power, but so did control. And tonight, control was mine. The chaos around us, the spilled champagne, the shattered vases, the flying desserts, and now the swaying chandelier, only highlighted the lesson that arrogance and cruelty come with consequences. Daniel grabbed my hand tightly. "Mom, it's moving too much. Someone could get hurt," he whispered, panic in his voice. "Yes," I said softly, keeping my gaze on the chandelier, "but sometimes letting people face danger, without panic, teaches them more than words ever could. This is a test of awareness, humility, and presence of mind." Vanessa's scream cut through the room again. "Do something. Please, someone," she cried, turning frantically to her father, her hands trembling. Her father, still pale and shocked, stammered. I don't know what to do." I took a step forward, my voice calm, resonant. "Vanessa, stop panicking. Breathe. Focus. The world isn't a place where fear should control you. And yet, arrogance blinded you, didn't it?" Her eyes widened. She opened her mouth to argue, then shut it, realizing that her words carried no power anymore. Guests turned toward me, listening carefully, their attention fully captured. Her parents were silent, frozen in disbelief. Then, the inevitable happened. The chandelier gave a sharp, loud creak. The sway increased slightly. Guests gasped and scrambled backward. One of the decorative ropes holding it taut snapped with a harsh sound. The chandelier hung by only one secure cord. The crystal prisms clinked together like a warning bell. Vanessa's mother let out a strangled cry. Her father tried to step forward, but the fear in his face held him frozen. Guests whispered, some crying softly, some snapping videos, all eyes glued to the fragile fixture above. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I let the moment stretch, knowing the tension was teaching a lesson far deeper than any words could. Vanessa's arrogance, her mocking of me earlier, and her attempts to humiliate others were all being reflected in the chaos above her head. Daniel looked up at me, wide-eyed. "Mom, this is crazy. Someone's going to get hurt." "Yes," I said calmly, my voice carrying authority. "And tonight, people will learn the consequences of underestimating others." Vanessa's panic grew. Her hands shook uncontrollably. She tried to shout to regain control, to call for someone to fix it, but no one moved fast enough. The hall was frozen in suspense, each heartbeat amplified in the silence that followed her scream. And then the worst moment came. A small part of the chandelier broke off, tumbling toward a table. Guests gasped, flinched, some ducking instinctively. The crystal struck the corner of a chair, bouncing harmlessly to the ground. But the sound, a loud, sharp crash, sent waves of panic through the room. Vanessa screamed again, her voice almost shrill with terror. I stepped forward, finally, my calm presence a stark contrast to the chaos. I instructed the staff to stabilize the chandelier immediately. They rushed to do it, shaking and flustered. Guests watched, some still murmuring nervously. Vanessa's family was pale, shaken, their pride thoroughly dismantled. And as I stood there, I realized that the first stage of the lesson had been delivered. The arrogance and cruelty that Vanessa had flaunted were now exposed, not just to her family, but to the entire wedding party. The chaos, though dangerous, had emphasized the fragility of power based solely on status and entitlement. But the night was far from over. I could see it in Vanessa's eyes, a burning mix of fear, humiliation, and anger. She had begun plotting, thinking about ways to regain control, to strike back, to humiliate me in return. And I knew the next move, the true test of patience and cunning, was just around the corner. Because this wasn't just a wedding, it was a battlefield, and I had only just revealed my first strategy. The next phase would test everything: courage, composure, and the ability to rise above fear and chaos. And in that moment, I allowed myself a small, quiet smile. The storm was only beginning. The chandelier had been stabilized, but the energy in the hall remained electric. Guests were whispering nervously, glancing around with wide eyes. Vanessa's family huddled together, shaken to their core. Her mother dabbed at her eyes with a silk handkerchief, still pale from the earlier shock. Her father fidgeted, trying to regain composure, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed him. Vanessa herself was frozen, trembling, her face drained of color. She looked at me with a mixture of fury, fear, and disbelief. Her carefully constructed image of power and sophistication was crumbling before everyone's eyes. And the best part? She didn't yet understand that the night had only just begun. I moved through the room deliberately, my posture calm and confident. Every step was a reminder that control was no longer hers. I had observed her arrogance, her mocking tone, the way she had belittled me in front of her parents. Now, the truth was out, and I had the opportunity to turn the tide completely. Daniel followed me quietly, eyes wide. "Mom, they're so shocked," he whispered. "Yes," I said softly. "And it's time they learn the next part of the lesson: humility. Arrogance and cruelty may seem powerful, but they crumble when patience and intelligence are applied carefully." I approached the head table, where Vanessa's family had tried to regain composure. I nodded politely to them, my voice calm but resonant. "It's a beautiful night," I said softly, "a night that reminds us all of what really matters: respect, empathy, and understanding." And yet, I let my gaze drift toward Vanessa, letting the tension build. Sometimes people forget those things. Her eyes widened. She tried to interrupt, to argue, to reclaim the attention, but I simply raised a hand. "Please," I said, my voice gentle, "let's all just enjoy the evening." The lessons we learn quietly often resonate the most. Guests leaned forward, captivated. The story of my quiet rise to power, my patience, and my unwavering calm in the face of chaos had shifted their attention. They were beginning to see me not as the family embarrassment, but as someone strong, intelligent, and capable, a force Vanessa had underestimated entirely. And Vanessa's panic grew. She darted her eyes around the room, searching for someone to validate her, someone to step in and rescue her from the humiliation. But there was no one. Her parents were stunned, the guests were captivated, and she was left exposed, vulnerable, and trembling. Then came the next subtle strike. I had arranged for the seating assignments carefully long before the wedding, ensuring that Vanessa would be seated next to her closest friends and her most competitive relatives. Now, I used that to my advantage. I leaned closer to the microphone, my voice calm and deliberate. "Vanessa," I said softly, but loud enough for the table to hear, "I noticed you've been very busy preparing for today, making sure everyone sees perfection in every detail. It's admirable, truly, but sometimes perfection can be fragile, and sometimes it can crumble at the slightest touch." Her mother gasped. Vanessa's eyes widened in alarm. The guests leaned forward. Murmurs rippled through the hall. At that exact moment, a gust of air from the open windows swept through the room, knocking over a small decorative centerpiece on Vanessa's side of the table. It tumbled with a crash, sending flowers and candles sprawling across the tablecloth. Guests jumped back. Vanessa screamed, flailing her hands to save the mess, but it was too late. The disaster was complete. The hall erupted in quiet chaos. Some guests whispered nervously. Others chuckled quietly, sensing the irony. Vanessa's face was red with embarrassment. Her parents looked horrified. She had spent months preparing for this wedding, and now, in front of everyone, her image of control was collapsing piece by piece. Daniel looked at me, eyes wide. "Mom, are you doing this?" he whispered. I smiled faintly. "Not doing this, Daniel. Allowing it to happen naturally. When arrogance meets its match, it unfolds on its own." Vanessa tried to speak again, her voice trembling. This is ridiculous. Why are you doing this?" I walked closer to her, my presence calm and unwavering. "Not doing it to humiliate you, Vanessa, doing it to show that every action, every word, every choice carries weight. Tonight, you are learning a very important lesson, one you will not forget." And then, just as she opened her mouth to respond, a waiter tripped over the wet floor near her table, sending a tray of hors d'oeuvres flying across the hall. Guests jumped back, shrieking, trying to avoid the mess. Vanessa's scream echoed through the room, high-pitched and desperate. The hall erupted into panic. Her friends tried to help her salvage the situation, but the chaos had already taken control. Vanessa's face was pale, her hands shaking, and her perfectly styled hair now slightly disheveled. Her image of elegance, sophistication, and superiority was unraveling rapidly, and in that moment, I knew something crucial. The first subtle strikes of strategic humiliation had succeeded. The guests were captivated, Vanessa's confidence was shattered, and her family had no idea how to respond. But the night wasn't over, not by a long shot, because the next phase, the phase that would truly leave everyone speechless, was already unfolding behind the scenes, and Vanessa had no idea what was coming next. The chaos in the hall had not subsided. Guests were cautiously stepping around spilled champagne, scattered desserts, and toppled flower arrangements. Vanessa's friends tried to calm her, but she was beyond reason. Her hands shook, her face pale, and her carefully maintained composure was gone. I stood at the edge of the room, calm, watching the situation unfold like a conductor overseeing a symphony. Every gesture, every reaction, every flinch from Vanessa and her family reinforced the lesson I had set in motion months ago. Arrogance and cruelty, unchecked, always find their consequences. Daniel tugged gently at my sleeve. "Mom, she's losing it completely," he whispered, eyes wide. "Yes," I said softly. "And she will continue to lose it piece by piece until she understands the impact of her actions. Tonight, the lesson is patience, observation, and the quiet power of justice." Vanessa's mother dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, still trembling. Her father was stiff, frozen, unsure whether to step forward or retreat. Vanessa's gaze darted around the room, desperate for some form of control, some ally who could rescue her from the spiral she was hurtling down. But the reality was clear: no one could. The stage had shifted entirely. I approached the microphone again, allowing the room to settle slightly in anticipation. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, my voice calm but authoritative. Tonight is a celebration of love, family, and the bonds that hold us together. But it is also a reminder that arrogance, cruelty, and the desire to humiliate others never go unnoticed. They have consequences, often in ways we do not anticipate. Vanessa's jaw tightened, panic flickering in her eyes. She had expected humiliation earlier, but this slow, methodical exposure of her arrogance was something she could not have predicted. And then I allowed the next subtle strike. I had arranged for several of Vanessa's friends to comment on the chaos. "It's really impressive," one whispered to another. "How calm Margaret is. She's handling this so gracefully." Another nodded. "Yeah, and Vanessa, she looks completely lost." The murmurs spread like wildfire. Guests leaned closer, captivated by the unfolding drama. Vanessa's face went red, her panic growing. Her parents looked increasingly alarmed, realizing that their daughter's carefully curated image was crumbling before everyone's eyes. Then came the next wave of chaos. A waiter carrying a tray of champagne slipped slightly on the wet floor. The tray tilted, sending glasses teetering and clinking dangerously. Guests stepped back, murmuring in alarm. Vanessa screamed, flailing her hands, trying to regain control. Daniel gripped my arm tightly. "Mom, this is insane. Someone's going to get hurt." I nodded calmly. "Yes, Daniel. And sometimes people need to feel the weight of their actions. Vanessa's arrogance and cruelty have consequences beyond words." Her father tried to intervene, but his movements were slow and uncertain. Vanessa's mother whispered, urgently, trying to regain composure, but the air was thick with tension. The guests were captivated, the spectacle growing with every passing second. And just as the panic seemed to reach its peak, another loud crash echoed through the hall. One of the decorative pillars near Vanessa's side of the room had tipped slightly from the earlier commotion, sending a small stack of plates clattering to the floor. Guests jumped back, some letting out startled cries. Vanessa's scream pierced the air, filled with fear and frustration. I stepped closer, my presence calm and commanding. "Vanessa," I said softly but deliberately, "please remember, tonight is a lesson, not punishment. You have had power over others through fear and judgment. Now, you are learning that humility, patience, and understanding are far more valuable." Her parents whispered frantically, eyes wide with alarm. Vanessa's panic turned into tears, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Guests murmured, some nodding in quiet agreement, others watching in shock. The atmosphere was tense, electric, charged with fear, awe, and anticipation. And then the final escalation struck. A gust of wind from the open windows caused the drapes to sweep across the floor, knocking over a small decorative lantern. It shattered with a loud crash, sending shards of glass across the walkway. Guests gasped, stepping back. Vanessa shrieked, trying to shield herself from the mess. Her mother gasped in horror, clutching her chest. Her father's face was pale and drawn. I remained perfectly calm, every movement deliberate, allowing the chaos to reinforce the lesson. Vanessa's confidence was gone. Her arrogance was exposed. Her carefully curated world was falling apart. And in that moment, I realized something crucial. The first real phase of her humiliation and the lesson in humility had succeeded. But the night wasn't over, not by a long shot, because the next phase, one that would truly leave everyone speechless, was already beginning behind the scenes. And Vanessa had no idea what was coming next. The hall was a mix of chaos and fascination. Guests were wide-eyed, unsure whether to laugh, gasp, or step carefully around the broken glass and spilled champagne. Vanessa's family huddled together, their composure shattered completely. Her mother clutched her pearls, shaking, while her father ran a hand over his face, trying to steady himself. Vanessa herself was trembling, her face pale, her carefully crafted image of elegance and power now completely exposed. I stood at the center, calm, composed, a quiet smile on my lips. Every misstep, every scream, every nervous glance from Vanessa and her family reinforced the lesson I had long prepared. The arrogance and cruelty she had shown me, and so many others, were unraveling before everyone's eyes. Daniel pulled gently at my arm. "Mom, they're terrified." "What's next?" he whispered. "Yes," I replied softly. "And they should be. Sometimes people need to feel the weight of their actions. Tonight, they are learning it firsthand." Vanessa glared at me, her face red and streaked with tears. You're ruining everything. This is supposed to be my perfect day," she cried, her voice trembling. I shook my head gently. "No, Vanessa, you've already ruined it for yourself. This day is showing the truth of who you are, not who you think you are. And I'm simply letting the consequences unfold naturally." Her parents whispered frantically to each other, glancing at the guests who were now fully captivated by the spectacle. The air was tense, the energy thick with suspense. Everyone in the room could feel it. The moment had shifted. Vanessa no longer held control. The balance of power had tilted entirely. Then I moved to the microphone once again, my voice calm and deliberate. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "sometimes we plan for perfection. Sometimes we imagine control. But life is unpredictable. And the truth always finds a way to reveal itself." Guests leaned forward, murmurs spreading like wildfire. Vanessa's friends looked at her with wide eyes, their own panic growing as they realized the depth of her humiliation. Her mother gasped audibly, her face pale. Her father's jaw tightened, his knuckles white. And then I delivered the next subtle strike. I directed the photographer to capture a group photo at the head table. But the seating arrangement was carefully orchestrated. Vanessa was placed between her most judgmental relatives and her closest friends, ensuring maximum exposure of her growing panic. Vanessa's eyes widened. You can't do that," she shouted. I smiled faintly. "Oh, I think I can. And tonight, I think I must." As the photographer prepared, a sudden gust from the open windows sent napkins flying and candles wobbling dangerously. Guests ducked slightly, startled. Vanessa screamed, trying to stabilize her side of the table. The room's tension escalated instantly, everyone holding their breath, wondering what might happen next. Daniel whispered urgently, "Mom, this is getting out of hand. Someone could get hurt." "Yes," I said calmly. And sometimes a controlled escalation is necessary for a lesson to truly resonate. Vanessa's mother whispered frantically, trying to calm her daughter, but it was too late. Her daughter's panic was visible to everyone. Her arrogance, her cruelty, her need to control, it had all been stripped away. Then, as if on cue, the next disaster struck. A waiter carrying a large platter of desserts slipped on the still wet floor, sending pastries flying toward Vanessa's side of the table. Guests jumped back, some letting out startled gasps. Vanessa shrieked, trying desperately to shield herself from the mess. The hall erupted in chaos. Guests whispered. Some laughed quietly, some murmured in shock. Vanessa's face turned red with embarrassment, her hands shaking uncontrollably. Her mother's face was pale, her father's expression frozen in disbelief. And just when it seemed the chaos could not escalate further, the chandelier above the head table, already weakened from earlier tremors, began to sway violently once again. Guests froze. Vanessa gasped, her hands covering her mouth. Her parents clutched each other, eyes wide in terror. I stayed calm, watching the pendulum-like swing. Every nerve in the room was on edge. The guests' whispers became tense, urgent, filled with worry. Vanessa's panic reached a peak. She tried to shout, to regain control, but her voice faltered. Then, Without warning, a crystal from the chandelier broke free, tumbling toward the floor. It hit the edge of the table with a sharp clink, sending guests recoiling and screams echoing across the hall. Vanessa shrieked again, nearly fainting, her mother gasping, her father frozen in shock. I remained composed, a pillar of calm amid the chaos. Every glance, every reaction from Vanessa and her family reinforced the lesson I had spent years preparing for. Arrogance and cruelty always meet consequences. And in that moment, I realized the night's first major phase had succeeded. Vanessa's panic, her family's shock, and the guests' astonishment had combined into a perfect storm. But this was far from the end, because the next, most shocking revelation, the one that would completely change everything, was about to unfold. The hall was tense beyond measure. Every guest was on edge, eyes darting from the precarious chandelier to the flustered bride and her panicked family. Vanessa's perfectly styled hair had frizzed from her frantic movements. Her hands trembled, and her cheeks were flushed with embarrassment and fear. Her mother whispered frantically. Her father muttered under his breath, and the guests were captivated by every unfolding disaster. I stood calmly, exuding composure and quiet authority. Every flinch from Vanessa, every gasp from her family reinforced the lesson I had orchestrated. This was more than humiliation, it was education. Patience, intelligence, and quiet strength always prevail over arrogance and cruelty. Daniel tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, should we stop it? It's getting worse." I shook my head slowly. "No, Daniel, the lesson isn't over. You will see, patience and control are more powerful than panic and arrogance combined. Let it unfold naturally." Vanessa's voice cracked as she finally found the courage to speak. "Mom, Margaret, you can't just, this is insane." I smiled gently. "Insane? Perhaps, but necessary. You see, Vanessa, control built on judgment and cruelty is fragile. And tonight, you are learning that reality is stronger than illusion." Her parents looked at me, wide-eyed, disbelief etched into every line of their faces. Her mother's hand shook as she held her pearls, trying to maintain some sense of dignity. Her father's lips were pressed tight, his jaw stiff, eyes darting to the guests who now whispered amongst themselves, clearly fascinated by the unfolding events. Then came the next phase. I walked toward the head table deliberately, my presence calm, magnetic, drawing everyone's attention. I picked up the microphone, once more letting the anticipation build. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, "tonight has been extraordinary. Love, family, and celebration have all been present, but so have arrogance, cruelty, and judgment. And it's important to remember that the world always balances itself." Vanessa's panic escalated. It's my wedding," she shouted, voice trembling. "You can't just—" I cut her off softly, but firmly. "Vanessa, it's not about taking anything from you. It's about revealing the truth, the quiet strength, and the patience that has gone unnoticed for far too long. And sometimes revelation comes in unexpected ways." At that exact moment, the photographer captured the head table photo. But the image wasn't posed or polished. Guests caught Vanessa mid-scream, hair disheveled, hands flailing to protect herself from the toppled centerpiece. Her friends tried to help her, but the chaos had overtaken the table. The photo immortalized the panic and the unraveling of arrogance in a way no one could deny. Vanessa's mother gasped, clutching her pearls tightly. Her father froze, shock written clearly across his face. The guests murmured excitedly, some whispering admiration at my composure, others murmuring disbelief at the chaos. Then came the next escalation. The chandelier, already weakened and swinging dangerously, let a small cluster of crystals fall. The sound rang sharply across the hall, making guests jump. Vanessa screamed again, panic clear in every fiber of her being. Her mother gasped in horror, and her father looked ready to faint. Daniel whispered urgently, "Mom, they're going to die. Someone's going to get hurt." I placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "No, Daniel, everyone is safe. But fear teaches lessons words cannot. And Vanessa is learning hers." Her panic reached a breaking point. She tried to regain composure, only to knock over her glass of water in her haste. The water spilled across the floor, adding to the slippery chaos. Guests shifted nervously, some stumbling back. Vanessa shrieked, trying to clean up the mess, but it was too late. The damage was already done. I moved closer to the microphone again, calm and deliberate. "Vanessa, tonight has revealed your true self. But this is only the beginning. Patience, humility, and empathy are what build real strength. Arrogance and cruelty, they crumble in the face of integrity." Vanessa's parents whispered frantically, trying to stop her from panicking further. Her mother dabbed at her face. Her father muttered to himself. Guests leaned forward, captivated by the unfolding revelation of strength and consequence. And then it happened, the most unexpected twist yet. A waiter carrying a heavy tray slipped on the wet floor, sending a cascade of champagne glasses toward Vanessa's table. Guests screamed, jumping back, some laughing nervously, some shrieking. Vanessa's panic turned into tears. Her mother gasped, and her father's eyes widened in terror. I remained calm, letting the moment unfold. Every reaction, every gasp, every flinch reinforced the lesson I had meticulously prepared. Vanessa's world had been turned upside down. Her carefully curated image, her arrogance, and her attempts at control had crumbled completely. And in that moment, I realized the next phase, the ultimate revelation, the part that would leave everyone completely speechless, was already unfolding behind the scenes. The hall was on edge. Every guest held their breath, eyes darting between the swaying chandelier, the toppled tables, and the panicked bride. Vanessa's face was pale, tears streaking down her cheeks. Her hands shook uncontrollably, her hair frizzed, and her perfectly poised image was gone. Her mother clutched her pearls so tightly it seemed they might snap. Her father's jaw was set, but his wide eyes betrayed his fear and disbelief. I stepped forward, calm and deliberate, commanding the room with a quiet authority. Every eye was on me. Every whisper, every gasp, every flinch from Vanessa and her family reinforced the lesson I had been orchestrating for months. This was the culmination of patience, intelligence, and quiet strategy against arrogance and cruelty. Daniel whispered nervously, "Mom, this is insane. What are you going to do next?" I smiled faintly. "Watch, Daniel. The next revelation will leave no one untouched." Vanessa looked at me, desperate. You can't do this. It's my wedding. You can't humiliate me like this." I shook my head slowly. "Vanessa, I am not humiliating you. I am revealing the truth. The arrogance and cruelty you displayed, the way you mocked others, the way you thought status and wealth gave you power, it is all on display tonight. And everyone can see it." Her parents whispered frantically to each other. Disbelief etched into their expressions. Her mother's hands shook. Her father's knuckles were white. The guests, meanwhile, were captivated by the drama, hanging on every word, every gesture, every moment of chaos. I moved closer to the microphone. "Tonight," I said calmly, "we are witnessing more than a wedding. We are witnessing the consequences of judgment without empathy, arrogance without compassion, and cruelty without consideration. And in every story, there is a turning point, a moment when the truth cannot be ignored." Vanessa gasped. What are you talking about?" I smiled gently. "You may not understand yet, but soon everyone will. And then I allowed the ultimate revelation to begin. I reached into my handbag and pulled out a folder, carefully prepared weeks ago. The camera crews I had arranged discreetly captured every moment of Vanessa's earlier arrogance, her mocking of me in front of her parents, her dismissive comments toward Daniel, and the moments she tried to belittle others. I stepped to the large screen at the front of the hall. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, holding the folder high, "sometimes the truth needs to be seen clearly, and tonight I will show it." I opened the folder and pressed a remote. The screen flickered to life. Guests gasped as they saw the footage. Vanessa laughing cruelly, pointing, whispering insults, mocking me and Daniel, and treating her family with condescending disdain. Every action, every cruel comment, every smirk was captured. Vanessa's eyes widened in horror. She tried to grab the remote, to stop the video, but it was too late. Her face drained of color. Her mother gasped. Her father's hands shook. The guests murmured in shock, captivated by the undeniable evidence. "Mom, she's going to die of embarrassment," Daniel whispered, voice trembling. I remained calm, my presence unwavering. "No, Daniel. She is learning a lesson, one she cannot escape." The footage continued, highlighting the arrogance and cruelty Vanessa had shown over time, not just today, but in subtle moments leading up to this day. The audience watched in awe. Vanessa's panic turned to desperation. Her mother clutched her pearls, whispering prayers. Her father's jaw tightened, eyes wide. Vanessa screamed, trying to cover her face, her hands shaking violently. You can't. No one should see this. Stop it." But I did not stop. I let the evidence speak for itself. The room was silent, except for the faint sounds of the footage playing. Every gasp, every whisper, every wide-eyed stare reinforced the lesson I had carefully prepared. And just when it seemed Vanessa's panic could not reach a higher peak, the chandelier, already weakened and swaying precariously, gave a loud creak. Guests froze, fear rippling through the room. Vanessa shrieked, covering her face. Her mother gasped. Her father froze in terror. I took a step back, calm and composed, letting the chaos and revelation reach their peak. This was the moment where arrogance, cruelty, and humiliation collided, leaving everyone in suspense, unsure what would happen next. And as the guests held their breath, the night's final act, the ultimate confrontation, was about to unfold, leaving everyone questioning what would happen to Vanessa, her family, and the wedding itself. The hall was silent, every guest frozen in tension. Vanessa's screams had died down to panicked sobs, her hands shaking violently as she tried to cover her face. The chandelier above them swayed, ominously, every crystal reflecting the room's panic like tiny warning lights. Her mother clutched her pearls, trembling. Her father's knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table, eyes wide with terror. I remained calm, a steady anchor amid the chaos. Every gasp, every wide-eyed stare, every flinch from Vanessa reinforced the lesson I had orchestrated so meticulously. This was not just a wedding. This was a revelation, a test of humility, patience, and consequence. Daniel tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, the chandelier, it's going to fall," he whispered, voice trembling. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Daniel, but no one will get hurt. Fear is part of the lesson tonight, and Vanessa is experiencing it firsthand." Vanessa's panic escalated. She turned to her parents, pleading, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Do something. Please. Stop this. This is my wedding day." Her father opened his mouth to speak, but his words caught in his throat. Her mother shook her head, muttering prayers. Guests whispered, some recoiling, some watching in fascination. I moved forward slowly, my voice calm and deliberate. "Vanessa, tonight is not about humiliation alone. It's about truth, consequence, and understanding. Your arrogance, your cruelty, your desire to control others. You cannot hide from them any longer. Her eyes widened in terror. I don't understand, she stammered. I gestured to the screen behind me. The footage was still playing. Vanessa laughing cruelly at others, mocking me, pointing fingers, whispering insults, all captured for everyone to see. The audience murmured in shock. Vanessa's panic intensified, her hands shaking violently. And then the chandelier creaked louder, swaying dangerously above the head table. Guests gasped, some stepping back, some clutching their partners. Vanessa shrieked, her face turning white, her body frozen in fear. I raised my hand, my presence calm and commanding. Tonight, the world witnesses the balance of arrogance and humility. One rises with empathy and patience. The other falls under the weight of judgment and cruelty. Her mother whimpered. Her father's face was pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple. Guests whispered urgently, eyes darting between the swaying chandelier and the trembling bride. Then it happened. A small crystal broke free and fell, striking the edge of a table with a sharp, metallic clang. The sound echoed across the hall, making several guests jump. Vanessa screamed, stumbling backward, nearly knocking over her chair. Her mother gasped. Her father's jaw tightened, disbelief and fear etched into his features. Daniel whispered urgently, "Mom, what if it hits someone?" I kept my composure. No one will be hurt. But fear teaches lessons that arrogance never does. Vanessa's panic reached its peak. Her voice cracked as she sobbed, trying desperately to cover the mess she had caused. Her friends rushed to help, but the chaos had overtaken the table. Her image of elegance and control had crumbled entirely, and just when the tension seemed unbearable, a loud snap echoed from above. The chandelier swung violently, sending several crystals crashing to the floor around Vanessa's table. Guests jumped back in terror. Vanessa screamed, her hands flailing, tears streaming freely. Her parents clutched each other, frozen in shock. I remained calm, letting the scene play out. Every reaction, every gasp, every flinch reinforced the lesson I had spent months orchestrating. Vanessa's panic, her family's shock, and the guests' awe created a perfect storm of suspense and revelation. And then, as everyone held their breath, I stepped forward, my eyes locked on Vanessa. "This is only the beginning," I said softly. "The truth has many layers, and tonight you are learning them all. The next revelation will leave no one untouched." The tension in the hall was unbearable. Guests were frozen, eyes wide, holding their breath as the chandelier swayed dangerously above the head table. Vanessa's screams had turned into sobs, her body trembling uncontrollably. Her mother clutched her pearls tightly, whispering prayers. Her father's face was pale, knuckles white, jaw tight. Every person in the room was caught between fear and fascination. I stepped forward, calm, deliberate, my presence commanding the room. Every movement I made drew attention. Every word I spoke carried weight. The chaos, the panic, the exposure, it had all been orchestrated with patience and precision. Vanessa's arrogance had led her here, and now she was learning the cost. Daniel tugged at my sleeve. "Mom, it's too much. She's losing it completely." "Yes, Daniel," I said softly. "And she needs to." Lessons of arrogance, cruelty, and lack of empathy cannot be taught with words alone. They must be felt. Vanessa's gaze locked on me, a mix of fear, rage, and disbelief in her eyes. Why are you doing this?" she screamed, voice cracking. "This is my wedding. You can't." I raised a hand to silence her, my voice calm but resonant. "Vanessa, tonight is not about punishment. It is about truth, consequence, and perspective. You sought to humiliate, mock, and belittle. Now, You are experiencing the balance of your own actions. Her parents exchanged panicked whispers, realizing that control had shifted completely. Guests leaned forward, captivated by the spectacle, whispering among themselves, some horrified, others fascinated. I gestured toward the screen. Behind me, the footage played again. Vanessa mocking, laughing cruelly, belittling me and others, every cruel comment and condescending smirk on display for the audience. Gasps and murmurs spread through the hall. Vanessa's panic intensified, her hands shaking violently. Then the chandelier creaked again, louder this time, swinging even more violently. Guests ducked instinctively, some gasping, some clutching their partners. Vanessa shrieked, her panic peaking as the crystals clinked and swung perilously above. I took a deliberate step forward, my gaze locked on Vanessa. This is the culmination of arrogance, the ultimate revelation that status, wealth, or cruelty do not protect you from consequence. Her mother whimpered. Her father's eyes widened in terror. Guests held their breath, waiting for the disaster that seemed inevitable. Suddenly, the chandelier gave a sharp, final swing. Several crystals tumbled from the fixture, scattering around Vanessa's table. The crash echoed through the hall, sending guests jumping back. Vanessa screamed, falling to her knees, her hands clutching her face. Her mother gasped, her father froze, unable to move. And then I spoke, my voice calm and unwavering. Vanessa, you are seeing the truth tonight. You are seeing the cost of arrogance, the fragility of cruelty, and the power of patience, intelligence, and quiet strength. And the final lesson is that no one is above humility. Vanessa's sobs filled the room. Her perfectly constructed image was gone, her family reeling, the guests captivated, and the lesson of consequence had been delivered with precision. But even in that chaos, I could sense her plotting, her mind racing for revenge, for redemption, for some way to regain control. The night was far from over in her eyes, and as the guests whispered in awe and shock, the chandelier, though slightly damaged, remained suspended, a symbol of tension barely held in check, just like Vanessa's pride, now shattered but still smoldering, waiting for what would come next. The hall was quiet now, every guest frozen, staring at Vanessa. Her body shook with sobs, her face streaked with tears, her pride completely shattered. Her mother clutched her pearls, pale and trembling. Her father's jaw was tight, his eyes wide in disbelief. The entire room felt the weight of the lesson that had unfolded over the past hours. I stood calm, composed, every movement deliberate. The chaos, the panic, the chandelier incident, the revealing footage, it had all led to this moment. Vanessa's arrogance and cruelty had been laid bare before everyone, leaving no doubt of the consequences of her actions. Daniel tugged at my sleeve, voice small. "Mom, it's finally over?" I nodded softly. "Yes, Daniel. The lesson has been delivered, and now it's time for understanding and growth." Vanessa's trembling voice broke the silence. I can't believe. Everyone saw me like this." She sank to her knees, covering her face, ashamed and humiliated. I stepped closer, my voice calm but firm. "Vanessa, this isn't about public humiliation. It's about truth. You mocked, belittled, and judged. You thought arrogance and status gave you power. But tonight, you learned that true strength comes from humility, kindness, and empathy." Her mother whimpered. Her father shook his head. Guests whispered among themselves, some in shock, some in awe, others nodding quietly in agreement. I continued, softer now, letting the lesson sink in. "Vanessa, it's not too late to change. Every action has consequences, but every person also has the power to learn, grow, and become better. Humility isn't weakness, it's strength. Compassion isn't compromise, it's power. And tonight, you have the choice to embrace that strength." Vanessa looked up, her eyes red and wide, searching for any glimmer of hope. Slowly, she lowered her hands, tears still streaming down her face. I don't know what to say, she whispered, voice shaking. Then say nothing, I replied. Just reflect. Let this be the start of a new understanding, a new way of living. Her parents looked at her, finally realizing the depth of their daughter's arrogance and the impact it had caused. They approached cautiously, placing gentle hands on her shoulders. We understand now, her father said softly. We didn't see it before, but we see it now. Vanessa's mother nodded, tears in her eyes. We see that humility and kindness are what truly matter. We are sorry too. The guests slowly relaxed, the tension lifting as they witnessed a family confronted by truth and beginning to accept it. The chandelier, though slightly damaged, remained suspended, a symbol of the tension, the lesson, and the fragile balance between pride and humility. Daniel looked up at me, eyes wide. Mom, you did it. You taught her. You really taught her. I smiled softly, placing a hand on his shoulder. Yes, Daniel. Sometimes lessons must be learned the hard way. But when they are, they leave a mark that guides a person toward the right path. Vanessa rose slowly, shaky but composed. She approached me cautiously. I don't know if I can ever make up for this, she said softly, voice trembling. You can start, I replied, not by words or gifts, but by change. Humility, empathy, and kindness, they are the only true measures of a person's worth. The room was quiet, reflective. The lesson had been delivered. The arrogance and cruelty that had defined Vanessa were now confronted with undeniable truth. And though the scars of the evening would remain, the opportunity for growth, redemption, and understanding was now real. As the guests began to applaud softly, not for chaos but for the courage to face truth, Vanessa's family embraced each other, tears flowing freely. The wedding had not gone as planned, but it had gone exactly as it needed to, and in that moment, I realized something profound. Revenge, when guided by patience, intelligence, and the desire to teach rather than destroy, could transform hearts, mend understanding, and create a lasting impact. Vanessa looked at me one last time, her voice barely audible. Thank you. I think I understand now. I smiled faintly. Then the lesson is complete. The hall exhaled. The tension lifted. The lesson had been learned. Arrogance had been confronted. Cruelty had been exposed. And the power of patience, humility, and empathy had prevailed. The wedding, though forever changed, had delivered the ultimate truth. No one is above humility, and kindness is the strongest form of power. And with that, the evening shifted from chaos to reflection, leaving everyone, Vanessa, her family, the guests, and even Daniel, with a memory they would never forget.